If you lie to the government, they'll put you in prison. But when they lie to all of us, it's called being a politician. You think taking guns away will save our kids from the killings, but you're pro-choice, abortion kills way more children. If America's so terrible and racist, it probably isn't safe to encourage immigration. Just saying, all the contradictions are embarrassing. You know who hates America the most? Americans. But we are all the same. We are red, white, and blue. Ashamed to be American? Okay, that's cool. Because honestly, we are all ashamed of you too.
Y'all are so fake. Oh no. The forecast said that there'd be snowflakes. Whoa.
And we're back at it one more time. Wide right turn coming your way with Jailbird Joey and Tom Kelly. Got a lot to pack into an hour, so we're going to go ahead and get going. And I know last time we talked, we promised we'd be having that discussion on mental health in schools, mental health funding, all that stuff here in Wyoming. We are going to start getting into that, but it's such a long conversation. We may do a couple of episodes throughout the summer to cover all of it, but we'll see what we can get done tonight. Let's welcome back Tom Kelly to the show. Hey, bud, how you doing?
Oh, doing great. We have all sorts of exciting things happening right now. We're not even really going to talk so much about anything that's happening at the national or international level because, quite frankly, that's a little played out with me at the moment. Probably is with you, too.
Oh, yeah. Tapped out early on that stuff.
All Trump all the time. I can't take any more TikTok videos of people screaming about how this is the Fourth Reich because JFK Jr. wants to try and figure out why so many people have autism. Let's just flush that to the side. The first thing to talk about is, where did you just come back from?
Well, interestingly enough, within the last hour, just got back from Cody, Wyoming. The Wyoming Republican Party had its state officer elections. Actually, we had a state central committee meeting, but everybody only seemed to be focused on the officer elections. And I know that because all of the press, except for Leo Wolfson, left as soon as the elections were over, and we hadn't even gotten into doing the business of the party. So, like you say, Tom, credit where credit's due, throw a dog a bone when they're being a good dog. Leo did stick around and will probably be covering all of the business of the party, but every other member of the media, every other podcaster, everybody that had a recorder there, as soon as the election results were out, they popped smoke and rolled. But we ended up with Donna Rice as our state secretary, Bob Ferguson as our state vice chairman, and Brian Miller as our state chairman. And there's a lot of people out there that have a lot of feelings about a lot of that. I'm just glad it's over.
And, let's talk about that briefly because the feelings about everything. I'm going to verbalize a little bit of frustration that I'm seeing with constant amounts of the tribalism and political playing. And I can't understand why so many people are so suspicious all the time of every action, every motive, every vote that's taken. First of all, it's politics. Yes, people play political games in politics. That's how things happen. But there's not a conspiracy theory in everything. And sometimes it seems to be lately when we're on the losing side of something, something's got to change. Something in the system is broken. Something has been rigged. You just can't fathom the idea that perhaps we actually lost in the arena of ideas or something like that. Now, I look at it right now, the most recent thing, Rebecca versus Brian. I'm cool with either one of them. I got to know Rebecca down in the state capitol, would have been completely comfortable with her as the chair of the Republican Party. Brian Miller, known him for years out here in Sheridan. He's been the head of the Sheridan County Republican Party. Brian Miller is a guy who helped really get me started going in politics here, along with Mark Jennings. So I've worked closely with him for many years. Congratulations to Brian. I love the fact that the guy who's the state chairman just lives down the street from me. I'm cool with either one of them. Prior to the election, I already saw things, the us versus them flaring up in Facebook. And I know some people say, well, just stay off social media. But social media is a great place in politics to put your finger on the pulse of what's happening. And quite frankly, I was surprised that Brian, to me, appeared to pull off an upset victory. I thought Rebecca was going to win that. When I saw Harriet had come down on her side, I figured it'd be a close vote. It wasn't that close. Brian won fairly handily. But then following up with that, I immediately see people going at each other right now about the Brian versus Rebecca camp. We've got the House versus the Senate camp. We've got the Gun Owners of America versus the Wyoming Gunners camp. Now WyoRhinos come out with their numbers now, and we've had these people who scored in the dreaded red at that point. And I'm so tired of it. I mean, come on, Joey, we even have the split up of your former network now. We've got David versus Joey. I have to deal with that stuff. It's almost like, you talk to both of them? Yes, I do. And I talked to both Wyoming gun owners, and I talked to Gun Owners of America, and I talked to Rebecca, and I talked to Brian. I talked to rhinos, too, and Democrats. I don't understand how so many people are just retreating into these smaller and smaller circles of purity, that we're having fewer and fewer discussions, and if somebody disagrees with you on something, there must be something wrong with them, or they must be up to something. So congratulations, Brian. And I know Rebecca's not going anywhere. She's a prominent voice in the state party. She's going to continue being a prominent voice. And I look forward to the work she's going to be doing, too. And as long as we're saying that, there is one thing I would like to mention about the Wyo Rhino thing. And some people disagreed with me on this, but I'm right. I'm right on this. It takes 10 votes. And I've said this about them in the past. They do a good job of taking a small sample of votes that gives a fairly good sampling and representation of where somebody stands on the political platform. And if you don't believe that, just hold up what their ratings are compared to other rating sites that take a wider view and look at more votes, if not all the votes. Wyo Rhino is usually pretty darn close to determine who's more conservative, who's more liberal, who's more in line with the Republican Party platform. That being said, I think one of their votes was a foul ball in there. They included the Convention of States. Now, see, I'm one of the people who ranked 100% because I had the correct answer of no for Convention of States. But I really don't think that speaks to how conservative you are. I don't think it speaks to how well you follow the Republican Party platform. There was a difference of opinion among conservatives on this. It split conservatives right down the middle. I saw some rock-solid conservatives. They still have a good rating of 90%, but they got dinged because they voted in favor of Convention of States. Now, on that policy basis, I thought it was a huge mistake to vote for the Convention of States, but I don't think it speaks to your progressiveness, because the people who wanted a Convention of States wanted it for the same reasons that I consider myself a conservative or a libertarian: an out-of-control federal government, federal agencies doing things way outside the bonds of the Constitution, never-ending debt, never-ending growth in government. Those are very conservative reasons for wanting a Convention of States. I just thought it was the wrong tool to try and fix those problems. And to really put it into perspective of, was this really an indicator of how conservative or Republican you are? Half the Democrats voted against it. Some of the most liberal people in the House voted against the Convention of States. So anyway, I just thought that was a bad choice. But, nobody's perfect, and obviously not everyone agrees with me on that. So before we jump into the next thing, because I brought up one of those Democrats, because I'm going to continue on with him, let me take a sip of water here and see what you have to say about what you saw with these shenanigans going on now in the Republican Party and in the media. And our first of our ratings coming out from the 2025 session.
Well, I'm not going to get too deep into it because I seem to be the only one that has all the audio after the election. But if we're going to just talk about the election, that's going to come out in a show later just so that people can listen to it and make their own decision. I didn't have a dog in this fight. I didn't have a vote until the morning of. My state committee man had to go deal with some family issues at the hospital down in Casper, and I ended up with a proxy at the last minute. And I kind of glad that my state committee man told me, this is who I intend to vote for, and I honored that, so I didn't have to get into it. But I don't know that it was an upset. I don't know that it pulled out at the last minute. There was a lot of things swirling around both sides. I've heard the hallway talk. I haven't seen it all in the media yet, but the fact that Ginger and Rebecca both lost is a symbol of sexism that exists amongst the state central committee, which is weird because at least a third by positioning is female, and more than that are actually female. So I don't know if it could be whatever that is. A lot of talk about money. Who was raising money? Is the party being bought? Is it for sale? I didn't see that legitimately. I heard it. I see how people have extruded that argument or that posture out of a lot of the statements from many of the candidates. And then the other question is, were people really worried about or swayed by Harriet Hageman's endorsement? And based on the result, first round ballot, no, it had nothing to do with being influenced, which honestly, I love Harriet, but I think it's a good thing that the grassroots were not taking the national endorsement as the only thing they needed to vote. I don't know about the whole Rebecca's not going anywhere thing. I was a little disappointed to see that as soon as she lost her race, she resigned as revenue chair, but I haven't talked to her about it yet. So we're going to hear a lot of things. We're definitely going to see things in the media over the next few days. Social media is already blowing up. I would say if you hear a narrative or you have a concern about a concept you've developed in your mind, get a hold of these people. They just campaigned for statewide office in the Republican Party. Their contact information isn't hidden. It's on every interview I did with them. Ask them directly. And if you're worried, like Tom said, you're suspicious and think they're just going to lie to you, then don't spread it around. You got to know that you know. You have to have facts and data. And until you have some kind of proof, just, okay, fine, be suspicious. But you're not helping anything on any side by spreading all this hyperbole. So the results of the election and why I say I didn't have a dog in the fight before and after I had a vote is because I don't see the chairman as somebody who does anything except for run orderly meetings. And if you run orderly meetings and don't unduly influence the body through your position, just follow parliamentary procedure, make rulings, let the body decide on just about everything, including overruling you, then at least you have the record, the minutes of the meeting saying this was the discussion, this was the decision, this was the vote of the body to either go along with it or overturn a call the chair made. And really, if we are a grassroots organization, a good chair is somebody who just runs orderly meetings, lets the people have all the credit, and sits there in the chair to take all the criticism. And that's it. So in my mind, it didn't matter who won. But for everybody else, yeah, it looks like it's another reason to have more factions within the factions on top of the factions. And I don't know at what point it's going to be just two people standing in every group side-eyeing each other. But we've got to find a way to heal and interact because we are a community. We are the Republican community. And every person in that room was either representative of something at some level, even if it's at the precinct level, or dedicated to the advancement of the grassroots effort. So we all have responsibilities to other people, not we win or we take our ball and go home or we start accusing everybody of everything because we didn't get our way. When I was in the Army, I got stuck into units on teams with people I didn't like, I didn't want to work with, but when it came time, mission dictated. That's all that mattered. So we got a job to do. Let's get that job done. Again, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about rating sites. I think Wyoming, the last thing you said about them, they got it right. You can compare their results to everyone else's and by everybody else's metric and methodology, which are totally different. They tend to reflect the same. But I looked at those 10 bills and I call bullshit. There are 0 abortion bills in there, and 2 of the bills are an amendment on a budget that never got off the ground, not standalone bills themselves. And then, like you said, Convention of States was in there. So I've never been a fan of the rating sites just because I think it's too easy for people to take them as gospel and not do their own research. But I am starting to see and have over the last couple of years of, there was a lot better bill out there that was reflective of conservative values as per our platform than this little thing you got over here. And that may have to do with if they added that bill, some of their 100%ers wouldn't be 100%ers, and some of their people they like to demonize might have a slightly better score. And honestly, if you put in the ultrasound bill and or the veto override of the ultrasound bill, some of those really low people would have come up 10, 20%, and you yourself wouldn't be at 100. So I'm a little skeptical, and I'm going to say what I always say. Take the rating sites with a grain of salt, whether it's CPAC, Rhino, any of them, but always go and look at the data package from Evidence-Based Wyoming. It'll take you to the bills, look at each of the votes, look at the debates and the amendments, and really know that you know. Otherwise, it's just, hey, I'm Republican. I'm voting for the guy that wore the red tie because that's the Republican thing to do. And you really don't know anything about it. You're taking somebody else's word for gospel. And it's just the thing that scares me the most. Never take my word for it. Never take anybody else's word for it, because standing in a court of law telling a judge, well, Jailbird Joey told me it was the right thing to do, is not going to get you out of trouble. You got to know that you know.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I thought, too, was that if they put in HB 64, I'm like, there's no way I get 100% on that one, because the correct vote for that was to vote for it, even though I was the only pro-life guy who was correct on that vote. I'm not bending on that one, but the reason I'm not going to rehash that part so much, but it has to do with what you were talking about, burying some of these hatchets and people working together on the same team. And sometimes that philosophy gets derided as being, singing Kumbaya and Rodney King, can't we all just get along, that type of thing. And I'll call bullshit on that, because just because I am respectful and friendly with people I disagree with, I don't bend on my principles at all. I don't change my votes because somebody smiled at me and made me laugh at lunch or something like that. I sat down and had dinner with John Baer and Scott Heiner and Chip Nyman, and I sat there with them and looked them all right in the eye and said, yeah, you guys were all wrong on the ultrasound bill. And you know what? We continue to have fun at dinner and be nice to each other, and we're all still friends, and we all still work together on that. So we didn't all hold hands and sing Kumbaya or anything like that. We continue to have our principles, we continue to have our differences, and we continue to work professionally together. Roll this into one of the people who voted against Convention of States. One of the rare times I saw myself on the same side with him is Representative Lewis. It's an inside joke between the two of us, but Representative Ken Chesty.
I get what you're talking about, but you called him Representative Lewis a few times, and I know I'm going to get those fast listening, quick typing people to think you're talking about Ann Lucas and not know why you call Ken Chesty Representative Lewis. So can you get into that for a second? Bring everybody up to speed.
Okay. I'll refer again to that inside joke, and it won't be that funny for everybody else, but Ken and I serve on the Judiciary Committee, and the first time he referred to me, he goes, well, I have to disagree over there with Representative Lewis. And I turned over, I looked at Lori Bratt, and I said, well, he can't be talking about me then. So he got my name wrong the first time, and he was always very cool about it. He was very apologetic, and from the moment, I was just like, it's okay. There are so many new people here. It's no big deal whatsoever. But he was very professional, very cool, but we just kind of had an inside joke for weeks that we would just greet each other in the morning, both of us as Representative Lewis. That's all. And he's a Democrat, and I am going to probably tear into pretty hard one of his viewpoints on something. And let's see if we could differentiate here the fact that I recognize and respect Ken Chestek as a successful professional, as an adept legislator, and as a Democrat with integrity. That being said, he's dead wrong on his arguments about DEI at the university. And you know what? I could sit here and rip into these arguments, and I'm not ripping into Ken. People need to be able to make that difference on this type of thing. This is how he sees things versus how I see things. It's a Wildfire article, and I saw this, and I immediately looked at it, and I started gritting my teeth. I'm like, Representative Lewis, I'm going to have to take you to task on this one. And then he would probably beg to differ if I took him to task on this. We'll let the listeners decide. He's got a column here on Wildfire that says, attacks on DEI highlight the fallacy of zero-sum thinking. Cutting programs that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion robs Wyoming of win-win opportunities. And I'm not going to read the entire thing. You can go on Wildfire and read it. I will read some excerpts from it. But he talks about the 2024 budget session where the Wyoming legislature had a footnote for no funds being expended for DEI. And he says that he's baffled why the legislature and others in Wyoming government, why are we opposed to diversity, equity, and inclusion? And these are good things we're supposed to celebrate. And for one, I have to call Ken there. I think he's throwing a red herring there. I really don't think anybody who opposes DEI programs is against diversity. Diversity is a fact of life. We're not against equitable treatment of people. We're not against including people in the process and including people in our educational system and in our Republican values. We are against government policies that coerce it, whether it comes naturally or not, at the expense of others. So here's one of the things he talks about, his logic on zero-sum games. He says this. Zero-sum games are situations where for every winner, there's a loser. Think of a typical sales transaction. For every dollar that the buyer pays, the seller gains $1. The net sum is 0. On the flip side, for every item the seller sells, he loses that item, but the buyer gains the item. Still a net 0. Wrong, Representative Lewis. That's not how an economy works. That's not how a market system works at all. A market system is not a zero-sum game. Wealth is created because value is subjective. Value is our perception. When somebody sells, let's say, trades $1 for a banana between a buyer and a seller, the reason that transaction happens is because it's not a zero-sum game. The dollar is worth more to the person who has the banana, and the person who has the banana thinks the dollar is worth more than that banana. So when they trade, that is the win-win we're talking about at this point. They are both wealthier at that point because they have something of greater value to them. That is how a market system grows wealth. During this time, it is all perception on what something is worth. You can create value out of nothing. I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, but the diamond is not a valuable and rare gem. That is the product of a brilliant marketing campaign. It is nowhere in near in rarity and value, true value, after I just said it's all perception, of emeralds and sapphires and rubies. Diamonds are dime a dozen, but they've got a marketing campaign that makes people think they're worth a lot, so you could sell them for a lot. Kind of like Bitcoin. Ooh, I'm going to hear from Jacob Wasserberger on that one. But that's not the case. It's not a zero-sum game in economics, but that's not what we're talking about DEI here. We have to move on here, talk a little bit more about what he's saying about how this is a win-win when we have these DEI programs at the university. He says, since DEI practices and attitudes promote respect and learning between different groups, it is a plus-sum game. If a favored dominant group reaches out to understand and respect a disfavored or oppressed group, that does not weaken the dominant group. The false dichotomy is that social prestige and opportunity are not a win-lose situation. One does not have to choose between which group has opportunities. Sharing opportunities can lift up both groups to heighten neither and could attain separately. And there's the flaw in Representative Lewis's thinking. Group ideology. We're talking about individual rights. We're talking about individual rights in a free republic. And this is where DEI fails the test of a free society. Because there it is, artificially carving people up into groups and deciding which group is oppressed, which group is privileged, and then the government comes in and artificially tries to tip the balance towards the so-called oppressed group or disfavored group, or however you would like to say it at this point. And this idea that somehow it's the people of the dominant group work to preserve the system as is and are against diversity, equity, and inclusion is a very lazy argument, especially when you look at people like Dr. Thomas Sowell, who's one of the biggest opponents ever of affirmative action. Somebody will say at that point, oh, Tom, you stepped in it there. DEI is not affirmative action. Yes, it is. It's rebranded affirmative action. In terms of government policy, no, they are not identical. They are different, but they are based on the same fallacy that because some people were screwed by the government in the past, we can make up for it by screwing other people today. And the Supreme Court has ruled at this point, this is not okay to tell an Asian student who's got almost a perfect score on an ACT that he can't be at a university because he's the wrong race. Because we have to make up for past discrimination up against another racial group. So we are going to deny your individual opportunity at this university and let somebody else in who is not as qualified. And that's exactly what DEI does. When people talk, and they talk in a negative manner about what a DEI hire is. Thomas Sowell, Dr. Thomas Sowell, a preeminent economist, he's in his 90s. He's still sharp as broken glass. He's a man who grew up in the segregated South from a broken home, raised by his aunt in a broken family, and had to deal with real discrimination, real racism, and real violence through his whole life. And this is how he described the whole idea of DEI and affirmative action and why it's such a bad idea. He came out of the Army as a photographer. And when he would get a photography job, because of America's unfortunate and tragic history of extreme and actual institutional racism, when people saw a black man had the photography job, they immediately had a huge amount of respect for him because they understood that racism, and they said, you must be really good because you got this job. He said the difference after affirmative action was people would look at this same man of accomplishment and integrity and say, you just got this job because you're black. That was what affirmative action did for him as an individual. It undermined his credibility because we started to see, no matter how often progressives deny it, people who were getting promoted beyond their capabilities, beyond their experience, and beyond their qualifications to try and make up for the wrongs of the past. DEI is fatally flawed because it treats people as members of groups. Now, Dr. Soul has also gone one better. He has done an entire study on affirmative action type policies. And again, somebody could say, well, DEI is not affirmative action. Well, he went outside the United States to erase our history from the equation, to erase slavery from the equation. And he studied in his book called Affirmative Action Around the World, racial-based policies, tribal-based policies, and ethnic-based policies in other countries. And he found the same thing over and over. It did not lift one group up out of obscurity or out of oppression. All it did was cause resentment among the groups. Race relations, tribal relations, ethnic relations got worse the more they pushed this. Sound familiar? We hear that in the United States. And not only that, they found something else out too. And this happens in the United States as well. When you have a policy that is meant to uplift women or uplift blacks because of the history of sexism and racism in this country, and go ahead, call me a bleeding heart liberal because I acknowledge history. But it never, ever helps the people it's meant to help. Who benefits from racial affirmative action and DEI policies in America? It's not poor blacks. It's middle class and rich blacks. Women who have benefited mostly from affirmative action policies, DEI policies, not poor single women struggling to get ahead. No, already privileged women. People who already had a leg up. So all we ended up doing was cause a sharper divide in the black community between poor blacks and rich blacks at this point. There've never been any evidence that it's done anything to reverse the centuries of institutional racism that we had with slavery, followed by redlining and black codes and segregation, the Jim Crow laws. It's embarrassing how ugly our history is racially in the United States. And DEI makes things worse by punishing people today for the things that people did wrong back then. So, sorry, Representative Chestik, it does not help the university to penalize white kids or Asian kids or male students or whomever just because we feel like we have to make up for what went wrong in decades past.
I agree. Affirmative action was one form of white guilt that didn't really do anything to help the people that it was aimed at. And DEI, it goes beyond white guilt. It's all the different types of guilt we can force on other people because of a misconception of history and the personal responsibility that comes with the liberty, the recognition of, hey, yeah, this was wrong before. We stopped doing it. Now go out there and grab that brass ring. This is America. I have to go to a personal anecdote here because when I went to the University of Wyoming, fresh out of active duty, I was still in the National Guard. I was a 32-year-old combat veteran freshman at the University of Wyoming. It started in like 2013. By 2014, they had stood up the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I remember the very first director or dean of that section. It's probably changed since then, but her name was Oneida Blagg. I was working at the Veterans Services Center, which is a dedicated center to help veterans transition from their role on active duty into not only civilian life, but academic life. So I wasn't an employee of the university. I was actually paid by the VA for the work study program. And the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion started this new program because, well, they changed the law about the post 9/11 GI Bill and allowed service members to pass on their college education funding to their children. So all of a sudden, the university had this group of what ended up being called legacy veterans, children of veterans who were using their parents' GI Bill to go to school, and they stuffed them into the Veterans Services Center programming. I didn't have a problem with that necessarily, except for it was never understood, and we're already working with guys and gals that are coming back from active duty service that are trying to learn how to reintegrate anyway. Now you're forcefully integrating this whole new population that has nothing to do with the original group, and these people started to take over. And I'd say within a year, by 2015, I was one of the first disciplinary hearings of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office. because I wasn't making certain people feel comfortable enough, and they felt like their ability to speak and express themselves and whatever was being suppressed because I was an employee in there. And yeah, you think I'm gruff now. You should have looked at me quite a few years ago. And in fact, people in the Republican Party have experience with that. And they've seen the sledgehammer being a sledgehammer before. So I'm not saying I wasn't, but ultimately what they said was that I had violated other students' civil rights for suppressing their freedom of speech, which was not happening at all. My question to them was, suppression of civil rights is a violation of the Constitution, which is a federal crime. Why are you having a disciplinary hearing? Why are the police and the FBI not here? In fact, I want you to call them right now and start an investigation. This is very serious. But the bottom line up front was they had people that they were more comfortable with, that they could stick into the other groups and push out the organic members of the group. The actual veterans didn't want to go deal with this anymore. I lost my job. Of course, it was given to a non-veteran. I don't know how the VA pays a non-veteran just because they're using their parents' educational benefit. But that was all a forced action that had nothing to do with actual recognition of diversity, because the veteran group is one of those groups. They wanted to own and control and stick their little pieces of what they thought was diversity in there. Just these kids. Some of them were female, some of them were single parents, all this other stuff. They brought a whole bunch of other issues that were not the core focus of that group. Not that we didn't want to interact with those groups on campus. Not that we didn't need to learn how to be in the same world with those people. That was the focus of the Veterans Center. But the way that they wanted it so they could check the block on all their little slices of the pie being in everything really ruined it. And it gave me a very quick understanding of how DEI works and why Ken Chestic is wrong. It's not about this zero-sum game because we all gain. Everybody wins when people can get together and talk. It's when you have things that are merit-based, like the Veterans Center. You should have to be a veteran, maybe not a combat veteran, but actually serve so that the programming that's there is adequate and accurate for who you are. We try to include everybody that we can, but we're working on veterans reintegrating. But the same thing with the university. When you start limiting that group, DEI says merit-based, okay, you have to apply and score X amount of stuff to get into college. Unless you score lower and you happen to be this, this, and this, because we need more of you and you and you in these different programs. That is not limiting what Kim Chestic is talking about. Ken Chestic says in his last paragraph, but diversity, equity, inclusion are not zero-sum games. When we all work together, when we respect each other, share our talents with each other, treat each other with dignity we deserve, we are better off. Every one of us has a gift to make the world a better place. Let's share those gifts freely with each other. This is where he's wrong. Getting rid of DEI is not stopping that from happening. Having DEI is stopping that from happening. His own words, when we all work together. We can't all work together if those who are supposed to be here aren't allowed to show up because they gave their slot away to somebody else who didn't deserve it. It's got to be merit-based in this situation. It's a school. You have to apply. You have to qualify. You got to pay. Now, there's other ways around that. There's sports scholarships and all these other things. But I think that DEI takes positions, even if it's in school or jobs, away from the people that can actually do them, have earned them, or possess the merit to be involved in that, and want to have this forced spectrum that some of those people may not deserve to be there for. So it's really not everybody. It's everybody that our Technicolor Dreamcoat spectrum selector has decided can be there. The other thing that brings me to is the University of Wyoming has been complaining for years that, oh, our enrollment's down and we have all this space and we never. Well, if enrollment's down, why do you need DEI? Let everybody in until you hit your enrollment cap.
I agree with his last paragraph about how things are better when we all share our talents and our different strengths. Where we disagree, like you said, is these artificial policies actually get in the way of that. And DEI goes one step even worse than just looking for people based on which sex or which color they are, what their history is, or their socioeconomic status. It actually goes as far as teaching these precepts to students, having workshops where people are supposed to identify their privilege or apologize or try to work on their whiteness. I could go off forever on that. So I'm just going to leave that there because I'd like to start rolling into what else we were talking about. You talked about veterans. And unfortunately, veterans also, particularly combat vets, in some ways become synonymous with mental health care issues. And this is something we brought up a few times before. It's another column we got here. It's on Cowboy State Daily. It's from former Speaker of the House, Sommers. And he starts off by saying suicide is an epidemic in Wyoming that touches every person in the community. In a state often described as a small town with long streets, this means we are very connected to each other and feel each other's losses, particularly those from suicide. And then he goes into this whole thing about how the darn Freedom Caucus keeps fighting all these wonderful mental health bills we're going to have, all these things the state's going to do to fix the mental health care crisis. He wants to have a serious discussion on that. And yes, I want to have a serious discussion on that because my primary responsibility outside my family, it's not being a legislator, it's not being a professor. It is doing the best I can to assist those who are struggling in life in such manner, just taking it personally upon myself to help guide people, get them to the right places, get them back on their feet, and be able to look in the mirror and say, I want to be here today. So I take this very, very seriously. And I get very concerned, and I've said this before, and I said this on the House floor, that the more government programs we have, the more people step back and say, I don't need to step up because we have a government program for that. But let's look at the foundation of this, about what is the mental health issue we're seeing right now in this country, without even necessarily getting into the causes of it. And then I'm going to talk briefly about, or maybe of greater length, about what the number one go-to is for these things. So looking at this right now, the stats that I find online say 1 in 6 U.S. youth ages 6 to 17 experience a mental health disorder each year. 1 in 6. Now, I find that suspect right there, that it's that many children have a mental health disorder. That's a diagnosable thing. Second thing is suicide is the second leading cause of death among people ages 10 to 14. That's terrifying in itself, that you'd have children who are supposed to be in the prime of their happy, ignorant lives deciding to end their lives at this point. That's absolutely heartbreaking to me. So anyone says, well, Tom, you voted against this K through 12 program in the schools to help mental health, you must not care about these kids. No, we're going to dig into that a lot further. Anxiety and depression overwhelmingly are the most common diagnoses with these kids. So the first thing we'd want to look at is, why are so many children anxious and depressed more than they have been so in the past? And we can start getting into social media. We can get into isolation. We get into bad diets, obesity, all those types of things, not getting enough vitamin D and sunlight. We're not going to talk about that right now. What I'm going to bring up is the number one treatment for anxiety and depression is to put immediately somebody on an SSRI. It's a type of antidepressant that's become very popular. They've been around for a long time, but they used to have more classic types of, I won't get into the pharmaceuticals of it right now, but they used to have more classic old school types of antidepressants, which actually have a better track record than the SSRIs, but apparently had worse side effects. So that's when we started looking at this, until we started seeing the side effects of the SSRIs. The prescriptions of these started rising precipitously about 25 years ago. And then by October of 2004, the Food and Drug Administration issued what's called a black box warning for, quote, increased risk of suicidality in children and adolescents. So we've known for over 20 years that these drugs we're giving to depressed kids increases their risk of suicide if they're children and adolescents. Yet we're still prescribing them. And lo and behold, you can look at this yourself. You can just Google a chart for suicide rate by year, Google a chart for SSRI prescriptions per year, and you will see that SSRI prescriptions and the suicide rate in the United States go up hand in hand. And everyone could jump down my throat all the time you teach methods and statistics. You should know that correlation is not causation. Yes, I know that, but it's a red flag to look into when you see that, especially when the FDA already acknowledged this over 20 years ago, that this may be causing this. Now, think of these studies. Since the correlation is not causation, I went digging through a bunch of studies from over the years here, and I'm going to read you some titles where they're from. So people would say, well, that's junk science, or where do you get that from? Did you get that from X Elon Musk's propaganda machine? No, these are from medical journals. The first one is from the British Medical Journal, and it's called Considering the Methodological Limitations in the Evidence Base of Antidepressants for Depression. And they concluded the evidence does not support definitive conclusions regarding the benefits of antidepressants for depression in adults. It is unclear whether antidepressants are more spit it out, Tom. I'm going to use the word effective because I'm going to trip on this word right now, are more effective than placebo. In short, they did a huge study of antidepressants, and there's no evidence that they work any better than giving people Tic Tacs, sugar pills. That people swear by their antidepressant drugs made them feel better, but when studying on a macro level, they find out that people felt just as good if they were given a pill that had no active ingredients in it and they were told they were going to feel better. The next study, antidepressants versus placebo in major depression, from peer-reviewed World Psychology. Quote, as of now, antidepressant clinical trials have an effect size of 0.3, which, although similar to the effects of treatments of many other chronic illnesses such as hypertension, asthma, and diabetes, is less than impressive. So World Psychology looked across that and saw a significant, albeit incredibly small, effect on depression for antidepressants. Also from the British Medical Journal, response to acute monotherapy for major depressive disorder. Quote, the trimodal response distribution suggests that about 15% of participants have a substantial antidepressant effect beyond placebo in clinical trials, meaning for 85% of people put on antidepressants, nothing. If anything, they're probably at a greater risk based on that black box warning of more suicidal thoughts. 15% is not a good track record for people who may or may have not been clinically helped by these. Would you go to any drug, type of strep throat, an infection, whatever it is, if you had all these modalities out there, and would your go-to be the thing that 85% of the time is going to fail, especially for somebody who's suicidal? I'll continue. Antidepressants and the placebo effect from the Journal of Psychology, another peer-reviewed journal. Quote, instead of curing depression, popular antidepressants may induce a biological vulnerability, making people more likely to become depressed in the future. A type of rewiring of the brain that may temporarily make them feel better, and they are forever balancing their latest dosage, their new medication, because whatever happens to their brain, it looks like these drugs make somebody more likely to be depressed in the future. This is not treating depression. This is making depression a lifestyle if this article is followed up on and they find more evidence of this. Now, I also have here the placebo effect in the treatment of depression and anxiety from Front Psychiatry, peer-reviewed journal. Quote, placebo treatments show a lower relapse rate than that reported for antidepressant medication. Those who are on fake drugs were less likely to fall into depression in the future than people who were put on antidepressants. Now, granted, these are people who have all been diagnosed with depression, and those given the fake pills did better than those given the antidepressants in the long run. Antidepressants and violence from the Public Library of Science Medicine. Quote, the association of antidepressant treatment with aggression and violence reported here calls for more clinical trial and data. Now we've gone from not only not working for depression, not only possibly making depression worse and more likely, but now violence against others, not just yourself. The next one, antidepressants and murder, case not closed, from the British Medical Journal. Quote, antidepressants increase the risk of suicide, violence, and homicide at all ages. And the last one I have here, antidepressant black box suicidality warning is empirically justified, from the Frontiers in Psychiatry. And the reason I brought this one in is because people have started saying that we don't prescribe these drugs enough because of the black box warning. And there was starting to be like a perception effect. Because the black box warning was on there, there was almost a placebo effect from the black box warning that people were afraid they would get more suicidal because they read that on the black box, and now they got more suicidal. So this was an actual study to see if that was the case. And the actual scientific study in the peer-reviewed journal says, quote, "The black box warning is firmly rooted in solid data, whereas attempts to claim the warning has caused harm are based on quite weak evidence." So let's start the discussion right there, Mr. Sommers, because we have a epidemic of children who are anxious and depressed, and the go-to for them is to put them on these pills, which at best do nothing for them.
Yeah, I've read a lot of what you mentioned, and I've gone through plenty of mental health care myself because, like you said, come out of the Army, that's the first thing they try to slap you with. Interesting bonus of COVID, when you couldn't get to the VA and everything got screwed up, my prescription ran out because I couldn't go and talk to the person I needed to talk to and get the right 6 people in line to sign a piece of paper. My meds just stopped showing up for almost a year. And when I finally got back to the doctor, they're like, "You're doing incredibly well without all this massive amounts of different types of medication we had you on." Some of them were different types of what they called mental health medications. They never put me back on them. I went through different processes and learned to develop different tools to deal with situations and just life where it wasn't necessary. So I'm definitely interested in having the conversation you just talked about rather than the conversation Albert Sommers brought up. But the conversation with Albert Sommers has got to include, why is it that this is a problem for government? We already have mental health care in the state, which really inhibits a lot of mental health care providers from accessing clients or vice versa. I know in Carbon County, we have the school district that has its preferred authorized provider who's not even in Carbon County. No other mental health care provider can take a referral from the school. I don't know why schools are referring people, but I'd prefer the schools look at a kid and say, I noticed this kid has some social issues. Let's find a way to get him some help than providing it for him there in the school. But I think if we're serious about addressing mental health care, we have to address the mental health care providers and the environment in which government stymies their ability to do it out in the free market. Even if, God forbid, it's subsidized by taxpayers during a transition to this other thing. Because we already spend all this money and they're talking about spending more money. And if we're already going to do it, might as well do it the right way and start getting government out of at least the providing the care and eventually out of paying for the care. Because really, that's the whole conversation. And I think that's what he's complaining about. Not that the Freedom Caucus or any good conservative Republican doesn't recognize that there's a mental health care or suicide issue. Not that it doesn't need to be dealt with, but you're asking the wrong people to do the wrong thing based on the wrong question. Is it another function of government? And is government throwing money at it gonna fix it? And if it is, why hasn't government throwing money at stuff ever fixed anything before? So I think we really need to take some time, have that conversation Albert's talking about, but make sure that we say, hey, it's got to include these things. And we have to take these other things seriously because the entire role of government should be getting out of the way of private industry and society and get back to having people being able and willing to take care of their own problems. That personal responsibility, knowing I recognize there's a problem with my kid and I know what needs to happen, or at least where I need to start to get them help. And it's not running to the government for mental health vouchers and pills.
He also brings up that Cassie Craven brought up an opinion piece saying that it's time for elementary school counselors in Wyoming. That could be a different ballgame in there because we're talking about things since there are increases in behavior. There are behavior spikes. There are problems that teachers are having, getting burnt out, having to deal with kids who have some serious issues in the classroom. We're open to discussing the idea of having a support system in a school. So when there's some kid who has to be removed from the classroom for behaviors, that there's somebody to talk to this kid and say, hey, what's going on? Somebody who's been trained in those types of things. Now, I've done this my whole life anyway as a teacher. I never referred anyone to a counselor. I just did it myself. And I'm still friends with people in their 30s because that's what I just used to do is get to know these kids. But not every teacher can be expected to do that. Not every teacher's got an aptitude to do that. So maybe we can have a discussion about having elementary school counselors for these kids who are having issues. We can maybe even have a discussion about having resources available, maybe directions we can point parents to have parents be able to come to the school administrators instead of feeling like they're in trouble because their kid's acting up, saying, I need help. We're overwhelmed. Is there somewhere you can direct me to get some type of help? I've got nothing against that. But like the bill I helped kill in the education committee was the sweeping K through 12 idea where the schools would be allowed to screen the kids for mental health issues without the parents' permission. No, thank you. And considering some of the foul balls that have found their way into pediatric psychiatry and psychology now, trying to tell kids that they'll be happy if they got a sex change scares the hell out of me. Especially because when I find out that everybody knows, those of us on the spectrum, we are 11 times more likely to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria. And it's typically just because most kids on the spectrum have a very bad time verbalizing why they don't feel like they fit in. And this has become the new fad. And this is why a lot of parents are afraid of mental health care in the schools because of what happened in Rock Springs. They think we're going to take care of your kid's mental health care by giving her chest binders and giving her different pronouns versus actually getting some type of help that they need. This has caused a very toxic dynamic of us versus them. I saw this on the education committee over and over. I spoke in favor of the schools and the teachers by saying I don't like this dynamic that the schools and the teachers and the counselors are all guilty until proven innocent because we've had some bad results. But we can't have open communication on any of these things when you've got one side getting all entrenched saying if you disagree with us, the teachers know better, the parents are bigots, the parents are stupid, the parents should be kept out of the loop because they're hurting their children. Or the parents on the other side saying all these teachers are libs of TikTok, blue-haired groomers, and you have to get your kids out of the public schools. Let's just face reality. Most parents are wonderful people who would die to protect their children. Most teachers are wonderful people who, unfortunately, in times of the past, have died protecting these children. So if we could have more of these conversations about what goes on here rather than come in with this accusatory tone that we'd already have taken care of all these problems with our children if that damn Freedom Caucus had just expanded state power, raised taxes, and had more government programs. Well, ask California how they're doing because they've done stuff like this. Or ask Illinois. You will see these same issues in the states that have massive state programs. You'll see them in places that have taken away parental rights. Watch what happens very closely in Colorado as they start taking away children because their parents do something nutty and call them by their name on the birth certificate. So, yes, I'm willing to have this conversation because I'm very, very interested in stopping good people from harming themselves. I'm very, very interested in teachers being able to do a job that they signed up to do and not be distracted by the mental health care issues that have generally come crashing down in society. To the point where I could sit down with Tate Mullen of the WEA and we agree 100% on what the problems are. We're diametrically opposed on how to fix them, but at least we can see the same issues and have a conversation, say, okay, at least we're on the same page. That there are more broken families, there are more screwed up kids, there are more children harming themselves. What do we do from here? Well, then we'll have to go in different directions at that point. But yes, I'm open to having these conversations, and I can't have them with somebody who immediately throws me in the Freedom Caucus garbage bin and says this guy's useless because he doesn't want a double taxation.
Well, it's easier to say things like that when you're doing it in a guest column and not interacting with the other individual or group, just slings and arrows from a blind position. So I'm going to give our listeners a little bit of homework so they can stay caught up with what we're doing. Go to the Cowboy State Daily article, guest column by Albert Sommers called Wyoming's Mental Health Crisis Deserves an Honest Conversation. I believe that was on April 14th. Just scroll through or go to their website, type in the Wyoming Mental Health Crisis and look at the articles. You'll find the one that I just brought up, and that's Albert Sommers. And then also go and look at Cassie Craven's piece, which is titled, It's Time for Elementary School Counselors in Wyoming. I think that was on April 6th. Either way, stay up to date with the information that we're talking about, and then maybe we'll try to fix that problem of it's easy to say these things in a one-sided opinion piece, and we'll try to bring in Albert Sommers and Cassie Craven, and we'll have that conversation. We'll do it here because, well, you're the only one in the legislature, so I don't know where else we'd have that conversation, and it's really not productive to try to have this in a town hall public debate because then you're immediately defensive. So maybe that's something I should start working on over the next couple of weeks. Get everybody to read those articles. We'll keep talking about mental health. And maybe that conversation will need to happen right here on Wide Right Turn.
Hey, that could be fun. Why not? I'm always up for that type of thing. We'll be having some of these really tough discussions in public on the recalibration committee because we've got a court order saying that part of a child's education now is the child's mental health. I'm wondering we're going to expand that to physical health too because, you can't learn when you're hungry. You can't learn when you're depressed. You can't learn when you have a sore throat and a fever either. So I guess maybe the school should take care of that. Of course, I say that sardonically. But yes, I would love to have an open conversation as long as it's going to be something productive and it's not going to be a gotcha game where somebody's going to smile to my face and then go off and write some column and completely misconstrue everything I said. Even looking here at this column, you think since Cassie is a conservative writer, Albert is not, that they've got some common ground here for the idea of elementary school counselors. Do you have to end the column with it is unfortunate that Miss Craven is prone to revisionist history? I'm not even going to finish that sentence.
The other thing he talks about is, Freedom Caucus. And since you're not, even though you're unfairly labeled that way, and none of the rest of us are legislators, maybe we'll have to find an individual from the Freedom Caucus to join us on that one. Maybe we'll have to do all those interviews or those discussions separately before we bring everybody together, kind of set the posture. Because, yeah, if I have to, I'll go full John McLaughlin. Next subject. Wrong. Your answer was incorrect. The correct answer was the government has no role in this situation. Now go beat your face on the floor until you're forgiven. I could do that, but I think this is a fun project to pull apart or just talk about why it didn't get off the ground, but definitely going to be talking about more mental health plans, procedures, perceptions over the next couple of episodes of Wide Right Turn. So make sure you're sticking around. Tom, before I get into your goodbyes, just want to do a quick, you mentioned Mark Jennings at the beginning of the show. I want to say a big happy birthday to Mark. It's his birthday today. By the time this airs, it would be yesterday. So happy birthday to Mark Jennings. And I mentioned also earlier in the show that the only member of the media other than myself who had reason to stay at the meeting, I was a proxy voting member, had to do the business of the party, was Leo Wolfson. Leo Wolfson will be leaving Cowboy State Daily this week. He's heading off to another job. So not only are we going to give him a fond farewell, I'm going to do an interview with Leo. We're going to talk about his time as a political reporter here in Wyoming. So stick with Just Blame Joey Live for that interview later this week. And Tom, aside from going through the pain of having to train another political reporter for whoever replaces Leo, I'm kind of looking forward to the rest of the summer, but we'll see how it goes. What do you got coming up over the next couple weeks?
Judiciary meetings, education meetings. You got graduation for the university in D.C. We've got recalibration. And to quell the rumors, if you hadn't already heard, yes, the Wyoming Freedom Caucus extended me an official invitation to join, and I politely declined. And our working relationship will remain the same. As I told voters, I would probably vote with the Freedom Caucus, and if they invited me, I would decline. And that's exactly what I've done. There's no news story there, everybody. Nothing exciting.
Breaking. It's funny that you said you politely declined, because even when I write the word thanks to people, they always read it as thanks. So politely declining, yeah, you're going to have to give us the whole verbiage on that at some point. But
I'll tell you very briefly what happened with that. I was on the phone. I won't say with whom, because I don't know if that person wants to be part of it. And I said, thank you. This means a lot to me because you went on a limb and you endorsed me. And the fact that you've invited me to join tells me I didn't let you down. But I did tell the voters I wouldn't join, so I'm not going to. It was a very good conversation.
Well, that's awesome that you got the invitation, and I'm glad that other people see your value as well as I do. And if they have any more requests, I'm sure they can do it just as the guy that's always willing to work with them. You don't have to join another group, team, or whatever to get her done. But Tom, that's just about going to wrap it up. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Make sure you're reading those articles I mentioned. And if you're out there at any of those meetings Tom mentioned, judiciary, education, any of the recalibration meetings, and you happen to see me or Tom, stop, say hi, and remember, we're not from the government, but we are here to help.
If you lie to the government, they'll put you in prison. But when they lie to all of us, it's called being a politician. You think taking guns away will save our kids from the killings, but you're pro-choice. Abortion kills way more children. If America's so terrible and racist, it probably isn't safe to encourage immigration. Just saying, all the contradictions are embarrassing. You know who hates America the most? Americans. But we are all the same. We are red, white, and blue. Ashamed to be American? Okay, that's cool. Because honestly, we are all ashamed of you too.
Y'all are so fake. Oh no, the forecast said that